Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today, April 13th of 2022, to speak about something that, well, it's popular in the news today. You've heard about it, but you may not realize the aspects, the totality of it. We're talking about the connection between intersectionality, the connection between censorship, the connection between a false bravado and false logic, and how these are all coming together to affect your life. And you may not realize it. You may not realize that it's affecting you directly, but we're going to address how it actually is. Now, first, before we get started, we do want to mention if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we welcome you and we thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all the social media that we can to be able to hear your voices in chats, in tweets, and in phone calls from anywhere in the world. And we do that because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe in your right to be able to be heard, to speak about the topics that affect us all. And so we ask you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to join us in our live stream to talk about the issues that matter to you. We hope to see you this Sunday. With that said, let's talk about the issue today. We're going to talk about Ben Shapiro. We're going to be speaking about Quentin Merritt. We're going to be talking about college and censorship. Let's bring it all together. On Monday, you may have seen or you may not have seen Matt Brainerd, who we've done a recent interview with, was speaking with Look Ahead America and talking about the subject of censorship. And I think it's very important to start there. And in that conversation that Matt Brainerd was having, he mentioned this.
And off the bat, we wanted to get behind something that seemed extremely topical and important at the moment, which was stopping corporate censorship. This was immediately following the aftermath of the President of the United States being kicked off of the most prominent social media platform. And in a way that really bothered a lot of people, as Elon Musk has recently said, Twitter has more or less become the public square. And to take somebody off of that who was engaging in illegal speech for no other reason than really just having a political disagreement, along with all the things that led up to it, such as censoring media reporting on things like Hunter Biden's laptop, or otherwise trying to shape the media, shape coverage by suppressing certain news sources, elevating others, along with a whole raft of other social media and financial firms and technology firms interfering with people engaging in legal activity.
And that's interesting to us. Yes, we're seeing all over the internet, all over social media, all over our news and television, we're seeing censorship. We're seeing people removed from various platforms. They are being unpersoned. They're being shut down. In fact, we have been a target of that most recently. You may recall that we were recently speaking about the fact that Discord banned our channel and punished everyone who is a member of that Discord channel for the mere fact that we had spoken about a protest that we were putting forward because we believe that many colleges are radicalizing our youth, that they are introducing to them information that will be dividing America. And we've spoken about that to some extent in talking about the classes at SUNY Broome College here in the Southern Tier of New York, which will be providing an event that will further radicalize, further segregate, further incite the division in Americans based on race. This is a troubling trend that we see happening right now. But censorship isn't just the deletion of information, not just the unpersoning of individuals. We see that even recently, even today, Rumble had to respond to the fact that they are receiving pressure from news media organizations, from individuals in the press, trying to emphasize certain ideas, things that they approve of, thoughts that were accepted by a more left-leaning ideology, and punishing organizations and social media and individuals that may have a different thought, that may want to express themselves with the First Amendment. It's kind of a troubling situation. And while that is correct, that censorship does include the deletion of content, of the people's voices, it also includes things beyond just being disbanded or being unpersoned. In fact, it's also the way in which information is presented to the public and how it is denied or warped by news media and a political ideology. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about and what's the subject today. We're talking about Ben Shapiro. Now, there has been a video that's going around. We're going to play that in just a moment. But you may have seen the news, perhaps in Newsweek or other American news media, and it says, Ben Shapiro called bozo by student during anti-transgender event. Now, this came out this morning, the event yesterday. And the information that we hear from Newsweek is that this is about a horrible event. Ben Shapiro was talking about transgender issues to an audience at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and that he was negative. He was horrible. He was invited to speak there because of the Young Americans Foundation, an organization we have spoken with before, and he was sharing with the audience his point of view that men cannot be women. In this reporting of this conversation, Newsweek has a very clear point of view. They want to get across a very clear summarization of the situation. But that summarization, that message that they are putting out to the public, to their readers who have not seen the actual video, have not seen the actual transcript, they're going to be misinformed. And Newsweek is doing this on purpose. Now, they say that Shapiro, who was largely welcomed by the audience, but when he took questions, became embroiled in a bitter exchange with one student who described himself as a mathematician and physicist. Now, they mention, and they cut to, the student said, so I think I'm pretty qualified to say that most of what you're saying is based on old data. Like, for example, gender identity disorder, that's a DSM-4 Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Bro, we use DSM-5 now. Shapiro responded, I literally cited the DSM-5 in the speech. They then stop with discussing the actual conversation that happened to interject some information of their own, that DSM-5 helps clinicians, researchers define and classify mental disorders to inform diagnosis and treatment. They go on to then say, the student commented, you sound like a bozo. Well, that's not exactly how the conversation went. That's not exactly what was being said, because then they go into Ben Shapiro saying he doesn't have to define or justify his masculinity. That's really not where the conversation goes. And then they go on to say that the student talked about Western colonial framework of gender. Well, they're really, really abusing the conversation. They're really denying you the actual context of what was being said and the critical comments and commentary that was going on in that. And they're doing that because they want to provide a very specific point of view. They want to tell you that the LGBTQAI plus ideology is something that's positive. They go into talking about the Indian Health Service, talking about American Indians and different ideas of LGBTQ. But that's really not what it's about. They even go on to talk about Ben Shapiro in an entirely different event, which has an entirely different context. They're misinforming the public. They're trying to make Ben Shapiro look like a bad guy, like he's done something wrong, that this student has done something courageous and positive without actually giving context of what was said and how it was said and whether or not it was actually valid. That's the censorship that's going on. And that's something that really needs to be addressed. Now, what actually was said and how was it said? Let's take a look at that before we go any further so we can understand how intersectionality is being promoted by the major news media and how they are suppressing other voices and other thoughts because they don't want you to think. They want you to feel, and they want you to feel exactly how they approve, which is bad for everyone. Let's take a look at this. So this is the video of the complete conversation between Ben Shapiro and a student who happens to be Quentin Merritt. And Quentin Merritt will be looking at his response to this video and the response of the public to what he had to say so that you'll have full context. But I want you to understand that under the umbrella of LGBTQAI+, under the umbrella of intersectionality, we see that people are willing to misrepresent facts, misrepresent themselves, to attack unjustifiably individuals on a personal basis to be able to push forward an agenda regardless of what the cost is for that. So I've said that, but let me show you the actual conversation.
Hello, my name is Quentin Merritt. I'm a mathematician and a physicist here, a double major, and I also just won the most prestigious award in the country to pursue research at any institution I want, the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship.
So let's stop right there. The first thing that we are told immediately in this conversation, which is after Ben Shapiro had been speaking for about 30 minutes and presented his case. This student, who, by the way, as we later find out, had just come from a gym to attend the event, Quentin Merritt starts off by saying that he is a mathematician and a physicist. This is a lie. And this is a lie that is done purposefully because it is a logic fallacy. It is the assumption that he is an authority, and therefore, as an authority, he is able to confront Ben Shapiro, who is an authority, who is a recognized authority, who is the speaker at the event. So he's trying to use his titles as a means to support and raise up his argument to be able to silence anyone who would disagree with what he is about to say. Now, we don't dispute whether or not he received an award. And if he did, just as Ben Shapiro said, congratulations, good for him to be able to excel. But what Quentin has just told us is he is a student. He is studying a double major. That does not make him an authority. That does not make him a mathematician nor a physicist. He is a student. He is someone who is learning about these subjects. And whether or not he actually does get a degree, again, does not make him an authority in those fields. It just makes him someone who got a degree, which he may get in the future. He then puts up his award to further substantiate that he is an authority, but he isn't. Yes, he got the award, but that does not make him an authority. We have to understand the way that people are being trained to attack those they disagree with, the way that they are being taught how to silence others around them through tricks and illogical arguments that are only meant to suppress others. So that's what Quentin has said so far, and already he has already deflated and devalued the rest of his argument because he has created this fallacy to start. Let's go on.
So I think I'm pretty, qualified to say that most of what you're saying is based on old data.
That's not true. Now, Ben Shapiro may or may not be using old data. That's a question. And that is a question of the source that Ben Shapiro is using. That does not rely on whether or not Quentin is actually an authority figure. It has nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with any awards that Quentin may or may not have received. If he's using poor sourcing, that is a different question. which Quentin has not asserted, as we will see.
But my question to you,
I
and so I want you all to like realize
last
that.
month, but sure.
Again, Ben Shapiro then responded, "You're incorrect. His source is from the prior month. It is 30 days old, the information that he is sourcing." So Quentin's argument is deflated. It is incorrect. He's made an assertion. That assertion has been corrected with proper information. So Quentin has failed now twice in his initial argument. Let's go on.
Like, for example, gender identity disorder, that's the DSM-4, bro. We use the DSM-5 now for psychologists to be able to talk
I literally
about...
cited the DSM-5 in the speech, and it's called gender dysphoria, which is the term that I use throughout the speech, not gender
You
identity.
sound like a...
Okay, so to support his idea, Quentin decided to say, well, your sourcing is based on this faulty data. He makes his point clear on what he's objecting to. Ben Shapiro clarifies the actual citation he is making and its relevance in his discussion, which deflates and defeats the argument that comes from Quentin. Quentin is a smart man. He realizes that he has lost the argument. It is over already because the supposition is that the data is incorrect. The data has now been confirmed and supported and clarified. Quentin doesn't have an argument anymore. His argument has failed. So what does Quentin do? What has he been trained by the University of North Carolina? What has he been taught by progressive ideology to do when his argument has failed and he has been proven to be wrong? Well, we'll see.
Yo, bozo, bro. And you get no pussy,
DSM-4.
and you can't even make your wife wet, bro. So what's good?
So he instantly goes to a personal attack. Now, Quentin clarifies, and we will go over that with you in just a moment, but he has a reason why he's made a personal attack. But understand the logic, and we see this in social media on a regular basis, and it's something that Newsweek decided not to tell you about. The major news media did not want to go into the fact that there was an unsupported, unsubstantiated attack on the discussion that Ben Shapiro had made, that it was based on a faulty understanding of the sourcing of Ben Shapiro, and that argument was defeated. Newsweek did not tell you any of this, nor did it tell you that as a response, the answer from Quentin, as he had been taught by his teachers at the University of North Carolina and probably before, was to then immediately go into a personal attack and to try and embarrass or to somehow deflate the character of Ben Shapiro. Now, it doesn't matter whether you like Ben Shapiro or not. It doesn't matter if you agree with his ideology or not. What is important here is this is a form of censorship. This is an attack which is being supported by the corporate media as identified by Matt Brainerd, and as we have discussed on this channel before, because the corporate media is denying you full context and an understanding that this is a false argument. And at the same time, they're not allowing you to be able to critique Quentin for making a false argument with faulty logic. Nor are they denouncing the fact that Quentin has made a personal attack that is unnecessary, unwarranted, and rather distasteful. But Ben Shapiro is not without his own ability to defend himself. By the way, also notice the entire audience of the University of North Carolina express their opinion of this personal attack.
So, let me just say, the nice thing about having several small children is I don't feel the necessity to have my masculinity
we're using
challenged
a
by someone
Western
like you.
colonial idea.
So Ben Shapiro just stands up, and this is where you see that edit that we saw here in Newsweek, that Ben Shapiro responded saying, "Let me say, the nice thing about having several small children is I don't feel the necessity of having my masculinity challenged by someone like you." He has reasserted himself and made it clear that the argument that is being presented to him is a personal attack, an attack that has no validity, nor is it relevant. That's where we go. And then we see that Quentin doubles down. He now returns and shifts the argument from a failed discussion that he had just made and a false premise that he had presented, and now shifts the argument into an entirely different argument that is not related to his initial statement, which is faulty data. He now makes an assumption, and he presents that as his new argument after the fact that his personal attack has failed, as we see from the audience itself. Let's see his new argument.
Of gender, then why should it apply? If we're using, because the gender binary is a Western colonialist framework of gender.
You're right. Men and women don't exist in any other culture.
No.
So again, he makes an assumption. He makes a generalization, Quentin, and Quentin's generalization that male and female is not a biological aspect, but it is a social construct, which is a progressive idea that is being supported by academics in schools and being taught to children. And in some cases, the application of this ideology is being taught to children as young as 5 years old, which we are seeing in many states, which is why we have seen laws like the Don't Say Gay law that is in Florida, Oklahoma, Alabama, and many others. Which of course is not about being gay, but it's about teaching sexual ideology to children at the ages of 5, 6, 7, and 8. So Quentin has gone into that popular idea, at least the academically popular idea of many socialists and many progressives, that sexuality is a social construct, which Ben Shapiro is arguing a biological question of gender. So let's see how he is going to respond to this generalization about Western society.
No. Think about Native American.
Nailed it.
Third gender people. I'm not saying that. Third gender people exist in Native American societies, Western African societies, like Southern Native American societies, like Mexico. So in other places that are not white dominated,
and
like the United States or Europe. And so you're saying white,
so
non-white
incorrect.
People. I'm a mathematician and a physicist. You cannot.
So what we heard again is that he's trying to point out certain cultures. By the way, he's not mentioning which culture. Is he talking about the Aztec culture? Because Mexico in the modern era, in the last century, if not the last 2 or 3 centuries, have Mexico and Africa and South America recognize the biology of male and female, both in sports and in society, and have done so for hundreds of years. This is true also in Eastern culture, whether it be China or Japan or Korea or any of the Asiatic countries. So there is an understanding of male and female biology, and that it is something that is intrinsic. Whether or not you agree with that, whether or not you prefer that, is entirely separate of the fact that it is recognized and has been recognized through modern history for hundreds of years, which Ben Shapiro has stated. So again, we see that Quentin is standing on poor ground. And to support his poor example, he then supports it again, saying, I'm a mathematician, I am a physicist, which he is not. He has not earned those degrees. He has not made that leap, or rather, he is making a leap to try and create an authority behind what he is saying that is unsupported by the truth, that it is factually incorrect. So let's go on and see what else happens here.
So I have a question.
And also, you're not a biologist.
So I have a question.
So he goes with the line from KBJ herself, from Ketanji Brown Jackson's mouth herself. I can't answer whether male or female exists because I'm not a biologist. Because again, this supports the idea that there is a biological, not social, definition of male and female. He's defeated his own argument. The argument from Quentin is that male and female are a social construct, But now, in saying that he is not a biologist, he is saying that not only does it take an authority to make this determination, but the type of authority is one based on biology and genetics, thus resupporting the fact that male and female are biological, not social. So he's failed in being able to support that he is an authority, and he's defeated his own argument without Ben Shapiro having to say anything else. That is important. We have to understand the failure. This is the failure of education in America at this time, that individuals have been taught to start with an argument, even if it's faulty, when proven incorrect, to attack an individual on a personal level, to try and discredit them, to try and support yourself with assumptions of authority that do not have any credibility, and to change the argument to a new argument, even if that argument is flawed, and to try and press that forward by using authority figures and self-claim of authority in a subject. So he's defeated himself several times. And we can see the failure of the education system that has taught him to be able to debate in this manner to try and win support for his point of view. Let's hear Ben Shapiro.
I'm 20. As a mathematician and a physicist, what in the hell do you know about human biology?
And you got your law degree from Harvard.
So Ben Shapiro has made, while it is a stinging rebuke, it is accurate. If we are to assume the authority that has been assumed and has been claimed by Quentin, then Quentin, in his own argument, lacks the authority to make the argument that he is making about the social construct of sexuality. And he has not provided any authority or any documentation, any support for what he has said. He's made generalizations, but he's not citing any recognized sources for that. He's just assuming an authority that is not relevant to the argument that he is making, an argument that he's saying requires a knowledge set and a authority he does not have, and that he has clearly stated. Quentin's answer is to say that, well, Ben Shapiro lacks the authority as well. Even if we are to assume that is correct, Ben Shapiro is citing authorities, the DM5, in his argument that he is making. So he is not assuming that he has the sole authority on this or that he is an expert, but he is citing those who are experts in making the argument that he is making. There is a difference, and it is clear, it is not subtle, and Quentin has failed. His education has failed. Not to say that Quentin isn't smart. Quentin may be smart, but he is uneducated, and he has been educated poorly, and it is on display, which is why the rebuke by Ben Shapiro is so stinging. Let's go on.
What do you know about biology? You got your law degree from Harvard.
And frankly, I would ask another question. If your logic is so flawed as a mathematician and a physicist, I would suggest that whichever institution gave you an award, revoke it immediately.
So, as a final rebuke against this student, Quentin, after taking several personal insults and addressing his core issues, his core arguments, and defeating those arguments, and Quentin himself defeating his own arguments, we then see Ben Shapiro go on a response to the personal attack that was made against him on several levels at several times. And he makes a very valid argument, which is also somewhat personal, in defending himself and saying, well, if you are such an authority and you have been taught that your authority gives you the ability to make these unsubstantiated arguments that you yourself have defeated, there is a underlying failure in the way that you are being taught. There is a failure in your knowledge, and that goes back to both the emphasis on a progressive ideology, on intersectionality, and to go to the way that he was taught to think. That's very important. And that's the end of the conversation. I will play it out just so that everyone knows that I am not editing any additional content that is of substance or adds context to the conversation. So that is over. So we've established, and I think we've established very clearly, that the education system, in its emphasis to be able to promote a political ideology, and let us be very clear, intersectionality, gender identity politics, and critical race theory are political aspects. They are political ideologies that are meant to put groups of individuals, categories of people above others for the basis of power and law. That is a fact that is continuously seen through the actions that we have seen and also being expressed by the corporate media. Corporate media that is looking to edit this information, to take it out of context so that you are provided a very biased point of view, so that you will support that ideology, which is supported by the corporate media, so that you will not think this through and you will assume that the authority, in this case the corporate media, is correct, and therefore, in that same line of thought, that Quentin is also correct. But in fact, they are not. And their argument is not substantiated. And the person who's the villain in this is not Ben Shapiro, nor his thoughts, which are unapproved by the major media and academics. No, in fact, it is Quentin and the process of thought that he was taught to use and the process of argumentation that he was taught to use by the University of North Carolina and his prior teachers. All of them should be embarrassed and upset that Quentin has gone through this process and has embarrassed himself as well as their institutions and the education system in America and its priorities at this time. Newsweek should be embarrassed at this time for the article that they published and the lack of context that they have provided to the public. And just as Matt Brainerd had pointed out, we see this on social media in addition, and this is the kind of censorship that is destroying America. It is destroying our ability not only to make arguments, but to think about these arguments and to be able to evaluate them as individuals rather than categories, rather than just having to accept an approved thought that is provided to us by individuals that assert their own greatness and power without any substantiation. That, as Matt Brainerd was bringing up, we need to question this, and we should fight against this because this is not the way to maintain a nation, a society, or individuals. It takes away from all of their abilities. This is Quentin's page himself. This is his YouTube channel. He has had, since this event has come out, he has 56 subscribers. He has a video that has 32,367 views as of this recording. And he has only 82 likes on what he has to say. Now, that is not indicative necessarily of the quality of what is being said by Quentin, although it is indication that his attempt to reach out to support what he had said is not finding ears, that it is not substantiated, and that he has been proven wrong. In addition, and I don't see the dislike, but I would assume, and I'm pretty sure people will be able to find this, that the dislike ratio is significantly higher than the like ratio. Not because Ben Shapiro is a great guy, but because Quentin is unable to substantiate his argument that he is making, and that he has failed in promoting the ideology of intersectionality and of progressive thought, and that his school has failed. And you can look at the comments that are prevalent and surrounding his entire channel of individuals who are pointing out the different things that are wrong. In particular, I cite this one right here, Wes Smith mentioning, "You are not a mathematician, nor are you a physicist, you are a student." There is a clarity here. Now, again, I want Quentin's words to stand for themselves, and I want you to hear what he has to say in its fullness as he tries to defend and support what he has done and to justify the false logic that he has used to use personal attacks to try and belittle and diminish an individual and to try and elevate himself by assuming an authority he does not have. Let's hear what he has to say.
Hey, my name is Quentin Merritt, and I just roasted Ben Shapiro.
That is factually incorrect. That is factually incorrect by, if no other criteria can be used here, the number of views of the video I just showed you from Ben Shapiro, 300,000. The number of views that Quentin is receiving, 32,000. On a magnitude and order, he is not seen as being superior. Although, if you're looking at Newsweek and certain corporate media, then you will get a sense that that is what happened. But if you are looking at what people themselves are responding to, that is incorrect. That is, again, another assertion of authority, an assertion of success that is not substantiated by any evidence that we can see. We'll go on.
But before I get into the reasoning behind my actions, I'm going to give you some background about my experience at the event.
Now, is the background that he's about to tell us of any relevance? No. He is using another slippery slope. He's changing the way that you are thinking about this argument. He is going to seek to try and win you over on an emotional level about an argument which is based in fact. He is trying to change your perception of this. Again, this is another technique that has been taught to him by the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and many of his prior teachers. We can only assume that this is what he has been taught, to change the argument, to change the framing of the argument, and to try and engage in an emotional battle on something that is based in fact. He is trying to now change things from the fact to how you feel, whether you like Ben Shapiro or whether you like Quentin Merritt. That's what he's looking to do. That is the new argument he's going to put here, and that's why he is introducing information that has no relevance and cannot be substantiated. This is his perception that he is about to present to you. Let's hear what he has to say.
I'm with a friend, and we strolled through campus to get to the gym, waited patiently in line, shuffled through security, all to get to the biggest and most controversial event of our time in college.
Introducing a couple of concepts here. That he has friends, that he was an innocent individual, that he was coming to this event presumably with an open mind, presumably. That he was just being another student going and seeing something that was incredible. And if the most incredible thing that you are learning at college, and I know it's been 35 years since I've been in college, but if the most important thing that has ever happened to you while you are in college is that an individual is speaking at your college, then that education system has failed you. That is my personal opinion. It may be incorrect, but again, we're talking about subjectivity here because Quentin has introduced subjectivity and personal reflection. And if it is about personal reflection, I can tell you that in my experience, the experience I have heard about and shared with many, many other individuals who have gone to college as well over the last 35 years, if this is the most significant thing he is doing in college, his college has failed him, and he has failed to seek out experiences that are readily available to him. But let's continue.
Ben Shapiro at UNCG. And as we walk down the stairs and try to squeeze into our seats and settle in for the event, we hear someone yell, "I fucking hate minorities." Just like that.
Okay, so now we have an unsubstantiated claim. Now, I find this interesting because, as far as I can tell, there is no video, there is no evidence that has been reported either by the major news media, nor by individuals at the University of North Carolina, nor by Quentin himself that shows any evidence of such a thing happening. Now, I'm not saying that it could not happen. I'm not saying that it did not happen. I don't know if that's a personal attack, an individual that has a personal relationship to Quentin, that they have a personal argument with Quentin. I don't know. But what I do know, and what can be substantiated, is that there is no evidence that these kind of racial slurs were being used at this event, either at large or by specific individuals targeting other individuals at the university. Again, this is an attempt to try and sway an emotional reaction. He has now used race, and of course it's called the race card for a reason. He's now used his race and a presumed slur to try and change your emotional outlook on his conversation and to change the context of his speech that he had, his discussion he had with Ben Shapiro. He's now tried to make you angry. He's tried to make you emotionally support him. This is a technique. It is a technique used to subvert individuals and to change the way that they would look at something in a manner that they normally would not. He's changed it from a substantive argument into an emotional one. And he wants you on his side emotionally without providing any substance nor any verification. It's his word, his feelings, and he wants you to share his anger, even though there is no reason for you to do so. But let's go on to hear what else he has to say.
My friend and I immediately looked at one another with shock. Him wide-eyed, looking at my black skin, and me uncomfortably staring at his brown skin against the sea of white faces that surrounded us. I mean, that was to be expected, given Ben Shapiro's demographic.
Why is it to be expected? Ben Shapiro has millions of followers around the world. And he's saying that the only people who can relate to Ben Shapiro would be people who are Jewish, not even necessarily white, but Jewish, because that's one of the key categories that Ben Shapiro actually targets or is targeted and that he represents. So again, now we're hearing this argument, well, you can only be represented by people who look just like you. He's assuming that because Ben Shapiro is light-skinned, therefore he supports or is supported by whites. Well, maybe, but is that to say that no one who is black or brown-skinned or Asian or indigenous, that no one else around the world supports Ben Shapiro because he doesn't look like them? Because we have now had this argument introduced by Quentin that only people who are like you, who look like you, who have either black or brown skin, well, they must support Quentin's point of view. You must align yourself and see yourself in Quentin because he's made this allegation, and because Ben Shapiro is other, he has to be an enemy. He has to be in opposition. Well, that's not necessarily true. And that is a weak argument at the very least, and it's unsupported. It's inaccurate. It is not factually correct to say that that is the demographics of Ben Shapiro's followers. What you can look online and you can look at his event. That's not true. So he has made a false argument, a false equivocation, and he is supporting that on the basis of my skin color, which at any other time in the world would be considered racism. He is using racist arguments to try and gain your support for his actions and his failures. I want you to be clear on that. And this is what he is being taught at the University of North Carolina and possibly by other teachers before in his life. This is the ideology of the progressive socialists that progressive socialists are putting out to the public and to our youth who will become the future leaders of our nation. Racism. Let's continue.
But what I did not expect was the lack of response to the hateful statement that resounded in my ears. No one batted an eye or turned their head except for us.
Again, he's assuming that people heard this statement, that, well, he's trying to make us believe initially that this statement and this situation actually happened, even though no one else has reported that, no one else has made that claim. He's making that claim, so he wants us to believe him, and he wants us to believe that in that event, under circumstances that we don't have clearly, we don't know if someone was standing right in front of him, if they were standing 50 feet away from him, was it shouted, was it said, was it whispered? How was this said? Did anyone else hear it? Where were they when that happened? We don't know. We only have the emotion, not even the substance or the situation, not even an attempt to provide a situation. All we have is an emotion to go off of, which is his racism, his preference of brown and black skin versus someone else who, again, he hasn't stated anything other than a supposition that they may be light-skinned, they may be white, they may be Jewish. We don't know. They're other. And this is the argument that he is making right now, which is not truly an argument. This is an emotional culling. This is an emotional call to action based on racism. Let's continue.
The lack of care by the people who surrounded me, most of whom shared the same views as Ben Shapiro.
How would he know? How can you say that the people shared his views? He didn't share the views of Ben Shapiro, and he was at the event. How did he know that there weren't others who disagree? And in looking at events where Ben Shapiro has spoken at on a regular basis, there are many members of the news media who don't agree with Ben Shapiro, and yet they are there to cover the event. There are many people on social media who go to these events, not because they share the points of view of Ben Shapiro, but to attack them. We have many students and other individuals who go to events of Ben Shapiro to protest and to be able to speak and to challenge Ben Shapiro. Is he assuming that everyone that was at the event, except him and his one associate, were there in support of Ben Shapiro and no one else was there to argue against him? Is that the argument that he's making? Is that the supposition that he wants us to believe that factually is not correct? Again, his argument is failing, but it is an emotional plea. It's not meant to make sense. It is not meant to be logical. You aren't meant to think about what he is saying. You are meant to feel. And you are meant to feel in alignment with him so that he gains greater support, not any thought. You're meant to react emotionally without the benefit of any logical consideration. That's what he's pushing for here. Let's continue.
Stirred a fire within me. And that's when I made my decision. I posted to my Snapchat story and I said that I was going to heckle him.
So he's, because of an individual who has nothing to do with Ben Shapiro, because it wasn't Ben Shapiro, nor did Ben Shapiro in his appearance at North Carolina or any other event that can be documented anywhere in the history that Ben Shapiro has been a public figure, and even before then, is there any call for racism? Does not exist. So he's now made a decision based on his own emotional feelings that he wants us to join in on, that he has now been justified to heckle. He's not there to object. He's not there to put in a critique. It's not because he's heard something that Ben Shapiro has said that he believes is factually incorrect. No, he has made a decision and he says that he has put that out to the public to now go and heckle. He's going to attack. He is going to try and personally, or he's going to try and emotionally disrupt this event because he has found an offense that has nothing to do with the subject matter. It has nothing to do with the presenter. It has nothing to do with anything except his emotions based on an interaction that we have no way of being able to confirm. And he wants us to support that. We shouldn't, but that's what he wants. Let's see what else happens.
And when they asked audience members to go down for questions, I went down there with that in mind. On my way up there, I asked myself, well, what does Ben Shapiro do? You know, he uses his influence as a political commentator.
So let's be sure of what he's just said. Ben Shapiro, based on not what he said at North Carolina, he's saying that he hasn't listened to the speech of Ben Shapiro. At least that's what it appears he's saying. He's thinking about past actions and past events of Ben Shapiro. He's not talking about what was being said at the University of North Carolina, not the subject at hand, the discussion at hand. He's looking for something else. He is looking for something to attack. He is looking for a way to try and take away the substance of Ben Shapiro, of the authority of Ben Shapiro, and the substance of any of his discussions. He's not looking at what actually factually was said and actually what may or may not be a weak discussion made by, or argument made by Ben Shapiro that day. That's what he is telling us. He isn't there to, and he isn't going up to ask a question because he disagrees with what Ben Shapiro said that day. He's just looking to disrupt and to cause people's emotions to be riled up as his then now are, or at that time were, so that he could emotionally sway individuals to support his own personal ideology. And we're going to hear about why in just a moment.
And touts his credentials from his Harvard Law degree,
to give himself the credibility to speak on issues that he's not qualified to speak about.
Except he also cites information that he has studied, that he has read. He uses sources beyond what his actual authority is, which is a lawyer and a individual who studies politics. No, Ben Shapiro uses citations and information that is available to everyone that he has investigated, and he makes his argument based on that, because no one individual is an expert at everything. But there are many ways. We don't need to be experts at everything. That's why we have reading comprehension. That's why studies and reports are made. That's why articles and commentaries exist, to help us to absorb more information than what we have by ourselves. That's something that I learned in college. That's something I learned before I got to college. And it seems it's something that Quentin is completely discounting. Let's go on.
So I did the exact same thing. And for those of you on the internet saying that there's no way that I possibly won this prestigious award, I'm sorry to tell you that you're wrong.
I don't know who's made that argument that he didn't win the prestigious award. I haven't seen evidence of someone saying that. Now, again, he may or may, I'm not disputing it. This isn't a claim he has made, but his claim does have some question based on the fact that he started his entire conversation, and during his conversation, assuming an authority that he does not have. So in saying that he has an authority, claiming an authority he does not have, then brings to question everything else that he cites. And in addition, in his discussion with Ben Shapiro, in misquoting facts, in misquoting Ben Shapiro and the argument that's being made, because of the multiple fallacies and logical inaccuracies that he has made in his argument, yes, every aspect of what he has said is in question and should be questioned. Because he did this to himself. He destroyed his own character, and he invited questions about his credibility and his credentials because of the manner in which he has argued and the fallacies that he made that were highlighted by his own conversation. So if Quentin's upset because people are doubting him, it's only because of what he himself said. Let's go on.
You know, it's true. I was awarded the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship.
Congratulations. I'm glad that you've gotten that award. I'm not even going to bother and check it. I'm going to assume that you are correct on that. That does not imply that you, Quentin, are any better or worse at anything else. It doesn't mean that you are successful or that you've made a successful argument. And it definitely highlights that there has been a failure in the lessons you've learned about logic and the lessons you have learned about being able to provide proof and making a logical conclusion on the things that you wish to discuss. You have failed. Your teachers may have failed you, and that's sad, but you have failed yourself. Let's go on.
And I'm a double major in mathematics and physics.
Which means you are not a mathematician, nor are you a physicist. You're a student. You're learning. You hope to one day become a mathematician and or physicist. You hope that these double majors will result in you gaining degrees, but you don't have authority. You are not what you have claimed to be. And you've said this now multiple times, that you are not an authority. So therefore, your credibility again takes a hit. Let's go forward.
This is what Black excellence looks like.
No, it doesn't. Black excellence is not the assumption of authority that you do not have, that you yourself refute. Black excellence is not using emotional arguments to try and claim a political victory in a debate. Having faulty sources and having faulty conclusions is not excellence. Using emotion and race to try and manipulate the audience that you are speaking to is not excellence. In fact, nothing that you are presenting or have presented is an example of excellence. Not for progressives, not for socialists, not for intersectionality or anything else. No group that you are trying to claim an association with, no group that you represent or claim to represent, no one is being given an example of excellence in the manner and in the way that you have presented yourself and the arguments that you have made. You don't understand excellence. I can understand why you are not an English major, nor are you a philosophy major, because you don't understand the words that you are using. Let's continue.
Sadly, I do have to agree with one point that Ben made about me. He's right. I'm not a biologist. And that's the point. Neither is he.
That isn't the point. Ben Shapiro has never assumed, nor has he stated that he was a biologist. If he had, then it would be correct to call him out for that. But he has never made that assumption. He has stated and he has provided evidence of where his citations are from. He is saying that he is educated on a subject, that he has learned about the subject from those who are experts, and he cites the sources that have provided him the knowledge that he has. You are full and absolutely able to question his sources. You are absolutely allowed to question the validity of the studies or the sources that he is using. That's perfectly fine. That is a debate. That is how we advance our knowledge, by questioning the things that we have available to us as evidence for the arguments that we are making. That's fine. But you are, again, using a slippery slope. You are assuming that since Ben Shapiro is talking about a subject that does, to an extent, cover biology, but also entails several other scientific disciplines, but you're assuming that Ben Shapiro, because he uses a subject and some sourcing, is therefore assuming the credential of being a biologist. He has never done so. That's your assumption. You are putting that on him. It is a straw man. It is a false argument. You yourself have made the assumption of authority, that you have placed authority on yourself that does not exist. And again, you're not a biologist. You're also not a mathematician. You're not a physicist. You aren't even someone who has finished his education. You are a student. So let's get things on the playing field the way they are actually exist, and not the emotion manipulation that you are attempting to achieve. Let's continue.
So in reality, the people in that audience should be listening to neither of us, regardless of our personal accolades or achievements.
That's incorrect, because people should listen to someone that is providing them information and is providing them the sources of that information. Now, should people have some doubt? Absolutely. Should they go and verify for themselves? Absolutely. Should they, as individuals, be able to and be encouraged to learn more for themselves based on a presentation that is made? Absolutely. But to say that no one should ignore, then why should we listen to anyone who speaks about any subject ever? There is such a big fallacy here in the presentation of what is being put forth. It is illogical. And truly, Quentin, you should know better. Let's go on.
And should actually listen to the biologists and psychologists doing the real research in these areas. And the research comes to an undeniable consensus that being transgender.
That's not true. That is not true. In addition to the fact, besides the fact that there is not an undeniable consensus, consensus does not equate to validity or fact. It doesn't mean that it is an absolute truth. We're talking about the sciences. Science is always a quest for a question, and as we gain more information, we ask new questions. There is no resolved science. There is no absolute definitive answer in science. That is a fact. It is a quest for questions, and as we get answers, we ask more questions. That is a fact. That is the basis of science. But you're presuming that that's not the case, that because there is a consensus of thought, well, then that must be the answer. Well, there was a consensus of thought throughout human history that the world was flat, that if you went too far, you'd fall off the edge. There was a consensus on that. There was a consensus that the earth was the center of the universe. There was a consensus for hundreds of years on that. and it was incorrect. There was a consensus at one point in time amongst many different tribes that trees were gods, that the sun was a god. There are many consensuses that have existed in societies small and large that are incorrect. To say that there is a consensus, especially in dealing with science, does not convey truth or fact. It just means that at this moment, some people agree for some reason, which may or may not be valid. Again, you're trying to use authority to support your point of view, your emotional conclusion that is not supported by facts or evidence. Let's continue.
Gender is not a pathology. It is not a disease. It is literally just a different way of being a human being. So, again, I'm going to be very clear. I'm not sorry about what I said to Ben Shapiro.
But you should be. You should be, because you've made personal attacks and you've used false logic and you used faulty evidence. You should be sorry. You should be sorry, if not to Ben Shapiro, then to yourself and to those who are listening to you for misrepresenting the information that you have presented, that you have been flawed in your logic. You should be sorry for your teachers at the very least, and your peers and your colleagues, because you have done a poor job of presenting yourself and what they have taught you. Let's go on.
However, I do want to apologize for the sexist language that I used.
The sexist language? The language? Not the sentiment behind it, not the personal attack. You want to be upset about the language that was used, but not the mindset that was behind the language and the reason why you decided to devolve into personal attacks. And that's something that you're not sorry for as well with Ben Shapiro, that you personally attacked him in a discussion that should have been above and separate of that. I'm really looking at you, Quentin, and saying you're doing a very poor job of acquitting yourself and the things that you have been taught and the groups that you claim to represent. It's really sad. Let's go on.
Back in 2020, Ben Shapiro spoke on his podcast about the song WAP by Cardi B, where he was rightfully mocked by the internet for awkwardly rapping her verses.
So Ben Shapiro, in a mocking tone and in something that was not serious, he's not a performer. He's not an entertainer. And he got roundly criticized for his attempts at entertainment. Fair enough. What does that have to do with the conversation in North Carolina? What does that have to do with the subject matter that he was addressing? Again, you're distracting us from the substance of what you said and what Ben Shapiro was speaking about. You're trying to, again, capture an emotional response to gain supporters for something that has nothing to do with what's being discussed at this time. You're trying to find a justification in emotion, and you're trying to bring people into you to support you because of an emotion about something in the past that has no relevance to what's happening and what happened in the University of North Carolina.
Then he took to Twitter and said, also, as I discussed in the show, my only real concern is that the women involved, who apparently require a bucket and a mop, get the medical care that they require. My doctor wife's differential diagnosis, bacterial vaginosis, yeast infection, or trichomoniasis.
Interesting. Did you notice also when Ben Shapiro had spoken about that and mentioned that there was sarcasm and satire in that whole conversation? Is that not relevant? Did you miss that? And even if he was being absolutely 110% serious, okay, that's his opinion. Even though it was satire, let's assume that it was serious. Let's assume that it was absolutely fact, that he was making a factual argument, which is not supported by the reality. So, again, what does that have to do with the University of North Carolina and his discussion at the University of North Carolina? You're trying to justify a personal attack that you made, which was also very vulgar in the way you made it, and you're trying to justify your actions with something that happened in 2020. Perhaps in 2020, within days or months of Ben Shapiro making that statement, perhaps it would have been relevant then. This is 2022. It isn't relevant in today, and it isn't relevant to the discussion you are having, nor does it justify a personal attack. You're missing here. You've gained nothing, and your attempt to emotionally sway individuals is failing. Let's go on.
And what that basically means is that he's equivocating the physical attributes of female sexual arousal with disease.
Maybe you can make that argument, but that's not necessarily what he's equivocating. That's how you're understanding what he said. Again, taking out of context whether or not it was satire. But let's go on.
Again, Twitter rightfully dragged him for this, for being so painfully unaware of the biology of cisgender women. This then begs the question, are we really going to trust someone like that to even attempt to try to tell us about the biology of transness?
Why not? Again, different subjects completely. They have nothing to do with each other. One is a statement about entertainment. Another is talking about statements of fact, of science and documentation and studies. It is a discussion about biology. It has nothing to do with entertainment and the context or the statement of something done in entertainment and said with satire. They're different subjects. They have nothing to do with each other. We're human beings. We can talk about more than one subject for the entirety of our lives. You're taking something in 2020 out of context to try and justify an action you took in 2022. You're not supporting your own argument. Let's go on.
When I got up there, I brought up the content of that tweet because I knew it would hit him where it hurt.
So there's the truth. Now we know why you did it. Everything else you just said is absolutely immaterial and useless. You did it to hurt him. You did it for a personal attack. It's not because you were trying to make commentary on what he said in Twitter. It's not because you're trying to support black women. It's not because you're talking about cisgender women. No, what you're doing is a personal attack. You did this to try and hurt him because you lost in an argument and that the information you were trying to use to support your argument failed. You devolved your conversation to a personal attack and you sought to cause harm. Something you had decided before you went up to speak when you made the decision, as you yourself said, to heckle. You were looking to cause harm, emotional harm, and you want us to support you in your attempt to cause personal harm because you're black and now you're bringing up gender. Sorry, it doesn't work. You failed. That is not justifiable, and you look even worse now that you have admitted the truth that you were seeking to harm others because you didn't like what others had to say. That isn't the proper response to a First Amendment action, that someone says something you don't like. Causing harm just because you don't like something is not justified. Let's continue.
And cause his past experience on Twitter to resurface. Why, you ask? Well, I again must be clear. Ben Shapiro and I don't have a difference of opinion.
You do. It's been very clearly displayed. You do have a difference of opinion.
The hateful and transphobic rhetoric that Ben Shapiro spews has the ability to do real and tangible harm to people in the transgender community.
Show the tangible harm. You've now made an accusation. You're making a supposition of fact. You're saying that there was a tangible, real harm. Documented. What is the harm? Please show your evidence for what you have just said. You said it was real, it is tangible, therefore it is documented, it is quantifiable. Provide your evidence of that. You've made an allegation without any substance, and at no point do you actually support that with any evidence whatsoever. This is your feeling, and you are conflating your feelings with facts. This is what you have been taught by the University of North Carolina. This is what is being taught to students around this nation, to conflate feelings with fact and to react to feelings and words with violence and acts of malicious intent. That is a failure. And my God, if that is what they are teaching at the University of North Carolina, as it appears, and if that is what you have been taught in your earlier education, we need to redo our education system because this is deplorable. This is objectionable. This is vicious and horrendous. But let's continue to hear what Quentin has to say for himself.
Because he has the platform to reach the people who write the policies and laws that might end up restricting the rights of trans people.
But Ben Shapiro isn't a politician. He's a citizen of the United States. He has a voice like many, many other people, just like you have a voice right now. You have a voice when you challenge Ben Shapiro. You have a voice right now because you're getting attention. So you have the ability to change laws as much as Ben Shapiro has, except your argument and the means of your argument fail. You have not supported your point of view, nor have you done justice to those who have similar views to yourself. So while Ben Shapiro has successfully been able to support his viewpoints for years, you have not. Which one should we actually evaluate and say has more credibility? Which one should have more influence? Something that is substantiated with fact, whether or not we agree with it, or someone's feeling that has no basis in fact and has no substantiation. And in fact, when we look at it, the only evidence, as provided by yourself, Quentin, is that it was meant in malicious intent. Should we pass laws because of someone's malicious intent? You seem to argue against that, and yet that's all you offer. Let's go on.
As a black person and a queer person, I had to call on the experience of the people who questioned injustice and fought for change before me.
What does that have to, wait a minute, you're a black person and a queer person. Fantastic, that's you. I'm a black Hispanic and I'm heterosexual. Why does your classification, the categories, the check boxes that you want to mark off and that you want to highlight, how does that put you any better in a hierarchy than anyone else? I'm 54 years of age. You're not. I have more life experiences than you have, just by the fact that I've been alive for some 30 odd years longer than you have. I've experienced many things. Does that mean that I inherently, just by existence, am more valuable and more credible than you are? Because if that is the case, also Ben Shapiro is older than you, has had more experiences than you, has had to justify his positions longer than you have. Shouldn't that make him more valuable? Why are you assuming that because you are black and queer, something that you have self-identified, that you have presented yourself, that has no basis in the discussion that you have presented? Your blackness does not change whether or not Ben Shapiro was correct in the evidence that he provided and that he spoke about. It has nothing to do with the failure of your failure, Quentin, to cite sources and to provide a valid argument against Ben Shapiro. Your blackness does not justify the personal attack that you decided you wanted to make and the injury and the malicious intent that you had. Being black has nothing to do with that. Please don't mention that again. Your queerness has nothing to do with anything that I've just mentioned. It is not a justification. It is not a substantiation. Please don't mention it again. It is an insult to black people, to queer people, to equate your failed logic and your malicious intent along with other groups of individuals merely because you share the same checkbox as them, a checkbox that is only really valid to intersectionalists, to critical race theorists, to those who believe in the progressive social ideology where they value individuals, they value human beings as checkboxes and not individuals. So please don't use that. That is insulting, and I do take offense to that. And according to your logic, that would allow me to personally attack you, except I choose not to do that. I am critiquing you on what you have said and its value and the false logic and premises you have been taught to be able to parrot out. Let's go on.
The majority black and brown queer people at Stonewall didn't lay down and just take the abuse of their oppressors. Neither did the organizers and allies at the March on Washington.
How do you know? You weren't at the March on Washington. How do you know what the majority of people thought? Again, you're making suppositions. You're using these things to try and raise your authority and to justify your actions, which is not possible. It's a fallacy. It is incorrect. You're trying to use emotions and you're trying to assume the identities and the actions of others to try and support, again, your malicious intent. It doesn't work. Let's go on.
Marginalized people should not be expected to be docile or respectful to the individuals aiming to reverse the progress we have fought so hard to gain.
Who's marginalized? You've now equated being black as marginalized. I don't accept that. You're equating being queer as being marginalized. I don't accept that. Not in 2022. If we were talking about 1950, I would agree with you. If you were talking about 1970, 1980, perhaps that would be true. But we're talking about 2022, where we have not only movements for, but we have organizations and we have individuals who have successfully been able to advance our culture to accept individuals of different colors and different lifestyles and ingrain them into our society, and even go so far as to go to the excess of many laws and very many institutions to make sure that we are supporting these individuals, no matter how few they may represent, as in the case of trans individuals, which represent somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1% of the entire nation. So let's be very clear here. Who's marginalized? You're assuming that because someone's color of skin, they have a certain color of skin, that they are marginalized. That's your impression. I'm not marginalized. I don't think anyone in my family is marginalized. I don't know anyone in my friends and family that believe they're marginalized because of the color of their skin. You're assuming that having a certain skin tone makes someone less than and makes others more than. That is your impression. That is not a reality that you're feeling, and you are trying to project that onto others. And guess what? Some of us reject it. Let's continue.
Rather, we must be bold and speak out and find ways to dismantle oppression by any means necessary.
That's scary. So, yes, I believe you should be able to speak out. Be as bold as you would like to be. I would suggest that you may want to make arguments that are actually fact-based or can be substantiated, or a logical argument at the very least, and not to include malicious intent in the arguments that you are making, or in fact, the reason why you're making those arguments and those questions. That's what I would suggest. But you also put in something that's very critical: by any means necessary. How far are you willing to go? You've already stated that you are willing to be malicious and to attack individuals based on a personal feeling that you have. How far are you willing to take that? What kind of statement is this? Is this a statement that is advocating for violence? And when I say violence, I want to be very clear, because the left-leaning ideology you seem to be espousing and to be positing here seems to also indicate and believe that words are violence, that words you don't like are violence. Not the First Amendment, which says that words we don't like are just as valid and must be as protected as those that we do like. Instead, you're saying that if individuals are saying things you don't agree with, that you are willing to go to untold extremes to be able to fight that, and that you are willing to use, and it seems that you are stating that these words are violence that you are willing to counter with other forms of violence. How far does that go? That is troubling. If this is what the University of North Carolina and your prior teachers have been teaching you, our education system has failed you, and you have failed yourself as an individual, because that should never be the answer. But let's continue.
And if engaging with Ben Shapiro is the avenue that I had to take to fight injustice and spread this message, then it was well worth it.
But what did Ben Shapiro do to cause injustice to you? If anything, you have been unjust to Ben Shapiro and to the audience. And that's why the audience responded in the manner in which they did when you made your personal attack, because you wanted to have malicious intent and you were seeking to harm another, emotionally harm another individual, merely because they exist and you don't like it. So, no, this isn't what you are proposing it to be. But let's continue.
Black power, brown power, queer power, trans power. Remember, there is no liberation for any of us marginalized people if they...
Black, brown, queer, trans, you're saying they're all marginalized, which isn't really supported by any fact. And let me support myself and my argument when I say they're not marginalized. How many black mayors exist in America today? How many members of Congress are black or Hispanic, Asian, or gay? How many? Are there trans individuals in the United States government? Have we had a black president? Do we have a black vice president? Do we have women in positions of power throughout this nation? Now, you may say, well, there's not enough of them. Well, that is a subjective statement, not a quantitative one. You're saying that there aren't a lot of people who are CEOs in the world either. So let's be realistic here. Do they exist? Are they able to maintain power? Do they change our nation? Because they do, both in private businesses, say like the BLM movement, which is a nonprofit private industry that has spent millions of dollars in donations to buy houses for Patrisse Cullors and other members of that organization. But they are powerful. They have collected tens of millions of dollars. We have individuals in our government at various levels: Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, Anna Presley, Kamala Harris. We can go through a list of individuals who have been able to gain power. How about Barack Obama? Again, there are many, many people. And that's just on the left. There are people on the right: Condoleezza Rice, Colin Powell, Justice Thomas. How many others? So they exist. There may not be as many as you would like. There may not be the type of people that you like that share the same ideology you have, but that's your personal preference. That's not the same thing as saying that they are all marginalized or that everyone is marginalized because your personal preference has not been realized. That's not the same thing. And actually, what you're saying is rather insulting to the people that you're claiming to be able to support. Well, let's go on.
There's only liberation for one of us. We must work together if we're going to achieve an equitable society for all of us.
But you're not talking about working together with other individuals. Quentin, you have been identifying that you are looking to separate individuals, that you are willing to go against individuals merely for the fact that they have a different opinion than yours. And when they substantiate the reason why they have a different opinion, your response is malicious intent. That's not unification. That's subjugation. That's authoritarianism. Please understand what you are saying. Your education at the University of North Carolina and prior seems to be failed. It seems to be very, very poor, because you have not been taught these lessons to be able to self-identify what you are doing and what is the consequence of your actions. I feel horrible that the professors at the University of North Carolina, and very likely across the rest of this nation based on the experiences that I have had and documented, are failing our students in such a great degree that you can come to the conclusions that you have without any remorse and without any self-realization of what you have done. But let's let him finish.
Thank you so much for your time.
No, you're not welcome for my time. You have wasted my time. Let me be very clear. If I have not been so far, although I believe I have. Quentin Merritt is a wonderful example of the failure of our education system. The supposition of feelings instead of fact. He is a realization of what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez told us on 60 Minutes. The replacement of fact, the replacement of empirical, semantic, grammatical, empirical truth with feelings. That is what he has shown us, and that is what is being taught. It was taught to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it was taught to Quentin, and we see it across our schools, and it is being continued to be taught, which is the reason why I am protesting the SUNY Broom event in the southern tier of New York on May 3rd, because it continues to teach what Quentin has put on display before us today. And whether or not that leads to me being removed from any platform on social media, whether or not that means that the organized news media is going to try and censor me, as has been identified, as we showed you with Newsweek, and as being discussed by Matt Brainerd, we are going to continue to fight against that. Because that is not beneficial to Quentin or anyone else in America. You don't have to agree with Ben Shapiro. You don't have to agree with me. But that does not justify the actions that we saw with Quentin and the actions and the manner of thinking that is being supported apparently by the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and at colleges across this nation as an example at SUNY Broome in Binghamton, New York. If you disagree with what I have gone through, which is a rather in-depth analysis here, showing you how intersectionality, how this emphasis on gender and identity and critical race theory, how it is hurting our nation, how it is failing our students and our future generations. If you disagree with that, I look forward to hearing what you have to say. I thank you for being here with us today, and I hope that you will join us on Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as we do our live stream to hear what you think about this and other issues that are affecting us all. I thank you.